the Facebook pages come up first, and then YouTube pages come up right after, and then we lit. Let's see here. Let me go to YouTube so I know we on. All right,
Yeah,
here we go.
I see the
Yeah.
live label
All
on
right.
the corner.
All right, Alito, everyone. Alito.
Alito, what it do?
It's me, Coach Crew Cut, and we got a special with Johnnie Aborigine today.
Yes, sir.
What's good? What's good, Johnny? What's good with you?
I'm coolin'. Everything been good. How you been?
Man, everything's great. Everything's great.
For sure. About to run it on this live.
Yeah, we about to run it real quick.
I gotta let it rip.
All right, I thought you was gone. All right, let me see. So what do you want to start with today? Well, how your day been going, first of all, before we even get started?
It's been good. Same old thing I do every day, researching and writing, finishing up my books that I'm about to send out sometime later on the night or by the morning. One of the first two books I'm working on with the genealogy book, how to receive reparations with genealogy, and a business book about foreign trusts.
Oh, okay.
So I've been working on that.
Oh, that's what's up. That's
finishing
big.
all that up. Yeah.
That's what's up. That's what's up. All right. Well, I know I ain't seen you in a while. It's good to see you.
Yeah.
Good to see you. All right. Well, we just gonna get straight to it. We can get straight to it. All right. So what you wanted to start off with? We're talking about New Orleans Indians.
So we can start at the top. So basically, there was a presence of New Orleans Black Indians already in New Orleans before the French arrived. You know what I mean? Before Orleans Parish came about in 1812, and before the Louisiana Purchase took place in 1803, there was already Black Indians here in New Orleans and in the New Orleans metro area and across South Louisiana. So there's evidence of such with the New Orleans Black Indian Cemetery, with the Black Indian burials in the French Quarter of New Orleans, which is downtown, off of Canal Street, Decatur Street, etc. And in this cemetery that was originally called the St. Peter Cemetery on the corners of Burgundy and Toulouse in the French Quarter. And what they found was burials or skeletal burials of Black Indians in these cemeteries. And the cemetery dated back to, I believe, 1760. And everybody that they found inside of the cemetery was what they called Black Native, or they did Black dash Native descent, or Black or Native, which meant that they was Black Indians, or in their eyes, in the European eyes, they was mixed Black Indian descent. But we know that meant that, they the Aboriginal or Autochthonous peoples from the area that we call today New Orleans.
Okay.
So there was basically already Black Indians already in New Orleans, and it didn't just come about with, what we're gonna discuss later with the Mardi Gras Indians. That's not the first the first marker of so-called Black Indians being in New Orleans with the Mardi Gras Indians. We have so many different documentations of Black Indians existing in New Orleans. So, and with that cemetery documentation, David M. Hotep, he also covered, that cemetery burials having Black Indians, skeletal burials there. David M. Hotep, who we know as a Pan-African or maybe Kemetic,
right.
like his name say, a Hotep.
Right, he's into the Kemetic. Yeah, right.
We know that he constantly talk about Africans all day long, and even he documented this cemetery, showing that the Black Indians was existing, and this cemetery was serious. Like, this is a serious piece of evidence, to start from. So he had met Chief Warhurst. He came down and met Chief Warhurst of the Choctaw-Shafunka Nation, of North Shore Lake Pontchartrain, which today is a part of the greater New Orleans metro area, but historically that was West Florida. That's like right across the lake from New Orleans on the North Shore side of Lake Pontchartrain, because New Orleans is the South Shore side.
Right. How long you think it's been since it's been Florida?
About maybe 200 years, because West Florida, the last year that British West Florida existed was about 1820. I might have that wrong, but it was the early 1800s.
Okay, so right at 200 years. I got you.
Right.
Okay. All right.
So with, Yeah, so David Imhotep came down to North Shore Lake Pontchartrain, spoke with Chief Wars of the Choctaw Shafunka Nation, and he ended up coming across this cemetery with all of these Black Indian burials.
Okay,
and,
that's what we're looking at now with the workmen pride open coffins found in French Quarter.
Right.
Okay,
exactly.
let me pull it up so everybody can see it. All right, there they go. They can see it.
Yep, that's it. And so he ended up having discussions with Chief Wars, not only about the cemetery, but just about Black Indians existing in New Orleans and Slidell, which is where Chief Wars is at, her village, which is Bonfaka, which is inside of, not inside of Slidell, where Slidell is sitting on top of Bonfaka, West Florida, which is in Slidell. He ended up, I'm going to read his quote real quick. He ended up went on a radio show discussing him meeting Chief Wars and these Black Indian burials. In his quote, he was like, let's talk about the Black Indians that I met that are still alive there in New Orleans. There are still unmixed Black Indians in this country, which is the U.S., and their history is a race. They're all over in places like New Orleans, Southern Alabama, Southern Georgia, and the Everglades, Florida. He went down, he said in his quote, I went down to them after meeting Chief Wars. They're called not the Choctaw, but the Choctaw, because the original spelling of Choctaw is Chahta. And not the Choctaw, or like Chief Warhorse be saying it, Choctaw. You know what I mean? Because that's just a made-up name.
Right.
Because with Choctaw, according to Chief Warhorse, it means God's people, or people of God. So that's the people of the land that originally sprung up, you know what I mean, from this area that we call today New Orleans or the Mississippi River, Gulf Coast, are talking to this land already where they at. And so he went on to say, you know, a few weeks ago, a guy was digging a pool in his backyard. He talking about Vincent Martello in downtown area of New Orleans. New Orleans was small one time and the area was country. When the guy reached 6 feet down, he hit a casket. He was like, what's a casket doing here? Underneath the French Quarter. It was a cypress wooded casket. And cypress is a tree grown in a swamp. It's never rotting. A cypress casket has been around for at least a few hundred years. He found Black Indians inside the caskets with Indian artifacts. So they had, you know, the typical Native American, so-called Native American Indian regalia on top of the deceased bodies or burials inside of the caskets. But yet they were so-called coming up as Black, so-called Black, but they got Indian regalia on inside of the burials. So it's like, how is that you have Black Indians in New Orleans when they teach us that Senegambians, the only Black people in Louisiana was Senegambians. Shipped over here enslaved in 1720, but yet you have these Black Indian burials existing from that same time period in downtown New Orleans already here. So that's one of the misconceptions that they constantly bombard us, because it barely had Senegambians in New Orleans like that. You know what I mean? It was a very small number. So you had, based on what they found inside of the caskets, you had a much greater number of Black Indians inside of those burials more than they had Senegambian imports into New Orleans. So I'm gonna just read the rest of the quote. He found Black Indians inside the caskets with Indian artifacts. He said, let's break north. Instead of where he was digging, he dug north, another casket. He dug south, another casket. East hit him, west hit him. They found that there's an ancient graveyard in all coordinates, a mile apart. They have found so far 20,000 graves of Black Indians downtown French Quarters.
Oh, trying to find where you was at.
That was on that. No, this on a different picture with David Imhotep. Remember one of them pictures I sent of David Imhotep quote about the Black Indian cemetery. Now inside of that link that you was just at, that was basically the report. That was the report of the cemetery.
I got you.
And David Imhotep did his own, you know what I mean, his own little quote.
Right. I got you.
He did his own report, and that's what I put in that post, or that you know, the meme, the collage meme that his face on. So yeah, so they had, and based on what David Imhotep is, because they didn't even say that they had 20,000 graves. So David Imhotep went behind Ryan Gray, which was the original archaeologist from LSU that discovered the Black Indian cemetery. He went behind them and ended up finding out that that's way more than what they were selling in the original article. So it was actually 20,000 graves that they found of Black Indians all across downtown. The more they kept digging, the more they kept finding bodies of nothing but Black Indians across downtown New Orleans. So we had a big autochthonous inhabitation pre-colonial before the French arrived, obviously before the U.S. arrived. And the thing about pre-colonial, people don't know that pre-colonial is basically based on when that state existed, when the state was admitted into the Union, when the parish or so-called county existed. It's like when New Orleans Parish, the U.S. version of the Orleans Parish, only been in existence for 200 years. And most people could trace their genealogy back, going back to like early 1800s, before 1812 or 1810, early 1800s, late 1700s in Louisiana.
A good 200 years back. Everyone should be able to get back by 200 with no problem. Yeah.
Easy. So it's not hard to trace your genealogy back pre-colonial when these states, when these U.S. states and cities and parishes were just been in existence for 180 to 200 years. It's not hard at all. So we had a big inhabitation of Black Indians. Then we had the villages. So it don't just stop there with the cemetery. You know what I mean? We had the villages of these Black Indians across the French Quarter, City Park, Metairie Road, Lower Garden District, New Orleans East, the Uptown 3rd Ward, and so on and so forth. Bayou St. John, downtown. And this was all, you had villages, you had Black Indian villages existing in New Orleans as late as 18, around circa 1820. You still have Indian villages existing in New Orleans around Bayou Road, off of what street is it? North Broad Street. That's Mid City, off of Bayou Road, and then you had I'm trying to remember the name.
Yeah, y'all don't know.
Michoud,
like that.
Michoud and Old Gentilly Road.
Okay.
Michoud and New Orleans East and Old Gentilly Road, which is the cross border between New Orleans East and Gentilly, which is Old Gentilly Road. So you still have villages of Indians still existing in New Orleans, downtown New Orleans, and eastern New Orleans, you know, on the outskirts of it, and in downtown, right around the time they say slavery was existing, around the time that they said, you know, blacks was just still enslaved or just African descent.
Africans, yeah.
Right. And these are the areas that Black Indians or so-called Black people today in New Orleans, you know, live at today.
Right. They call them Ethiopians. The dark, because I know this because I know I was doing my genealogy, and my great-great-grandfather from South Carolina married this with one of my great aunts, that's Boulay. She was trying to push the African ahead. It's like, yeah, he married an African woman in Louisiana. And I said, well, how did she get to Louisiana then?
Right. How she got there.
So, yeah. You right.
So that was just one of the reclassifications that they put on us. It's not to be taken literal.
That's it.
And so some of them Indian villages, you actually had tribes. It wasn't just Black Indian like a blanket term. They actually had specific names of the tribes existing, you know, in these Indian villages across New Orleans, like the Colapisa, the Quinapisa, the Bayagula, the Chapatulas, the Mugalasha, Tangipahoa, Pascagoula. Then you also had the Natchez, the Yatasi, Biloxi, Shawasha, and Chitimacha. And
so almost all the cities is almost named after the tribes, basically.
Yeah, after the Indians, because they still got their Indian village names. Like they basically turned the Indian villages into streets.
Right.
So they named all the streets after the Indian villages that was sitting there.
They do that here too. Right here, all the streets are named after Indian villages. Well, we didn't have villages. They would call them creek towns or whatever. But yeah, they named them after the creeks.
So that lets you know that that the people never went nowhere and who was there. Like they let you know right in front of your face. So, and these people and these Indian tribes became slaves, like if not right on the land that their village was sitting on, but next to it. Like the plantations was formed right next to the villages in Bayou St. John, Gentilly.
Well, they say slaves, but I say people got up, went to them plantations, worked, got through, went back home, and did it again tomorrow. That's what they did.
True. Just work.
That was a 94-year-old man told me He said that nah, them folks got up, went across town and went and did that. They went and did it. That's what they went to go do.
Yeah, they needed work, or they just need to supply themselves.
That's
But
right.
they just create a new narrative saying slavery in order to cover up the fact that they was Indians.
That's
right.
All
it
was.
Right.
That's right. That's right. Now, before we continue on, I see Phoenix in the chat. Yeah, we do. Everyone, please subscribe to No Grandma Killers on YouTube. This stream is on all the streams, but before it ends, it will all end on No Grandma Killers. Some of the feeds that don't have that many people on them will start ending. And if it ends, just go over to No Grandma Killers and you can finish out this stream. All right, I'm back, big homie.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me get out of here and go to the next one. So the villages, it says, what's the exact original homeland of New Orleans Black Indians? And it talks about the miles.
What people think with the Black Indians of New Orleans, they constantly, I don't want to say confuse them, but they constantly think that the today's Mexican Mardi Gras Indians is the New Orleans Indian tribe, or people that celebrate, or people that mask as Indians today in New Orleans come from those New Orleans Indian tribes.
So they don't?
No, they don't. I mean, not all of them. Not all of them. And the tribe that they set up is not necessarily based on New Orleans Indian tribes, because they randomly come up with their own names when they masking. So when they say that they Ninth Ward Mohawk Hunters or a Black Apache, they coming up with their own names to mask. So it's not necessarily a reflection of New Orleans Indian tribes. It's just
where they at.
This is right. This is how they celebrate the tradition of Indian culture in New Orleans. So you have people that mask as Mardi Gras Indians who have genealogies that trace back to Georgia, Virginia, South Carolina. And then what happens is they mask as Indians in the New Orleans, the New Orleans territory, or the Indian territory that New Orleans sit on, and start consuming or engulfing themselves into New Orleans Indian culture, and think that since they know the fact that they come from Georgia, South Carolina, they'll feel like they could just, take the original New Orleans Indian tribe and start claiming that, because since that's where they at the deep. And so they think because they was still the New Orleans Indian tribe was of the Choctaw lineage or the Muskogee Indian lineage, since Muskogee existed in Georgia or South Carolina or Alabama or Florida, they feel like they could just come here and claim a New Orleans Indian tribe just because they believe that there was Muskogee, but everybody got their own genealogies, to reflect their tribal identity. But I say that to say that the New Orleans Indian tribes all come from North Shore, Lake Pontchartrain, or the Lake Pontchartrain area where the Shafunka mound building culture was concentrated at. And the Shafunka mound building culture was mound builders who built shell mitten mounds across the entire Lake Pontchartrain area, North Shore and South Shore. They built shell mitten mounds to bury their dead, to create cities, they spiritual centers.
So you know who built the mounds and all up through there. That's tough.
Yeah. So they found there was a report, I want to say the guy last name was Lindsley, who found the original Poverty Point site, because they actually found the oldest Poverty Point site in New Orleans. They originally said it was in Monroe, Louisiana. The Poverty Point mounds, but they actually found the oldest and they dated the Poverty Point mounds at, I believe, 2,000 years old, or 2000 BC. So the oldest Poverty Point mounds in New Orleans was considered the oldest, and they call it the Lindsley site. Okay, so if the ones in Monroe is 2000 BC, that means the one in New Orleans would have to be, about 1,000 years older. And what they found was Shafunka culture artifacts, such as the pottery, tobacco pipes, things that, the Shafunka culture was practicing or using the most, when it was in that area in New Orleans East, when they was building those mounds. So and within that report or the study of the Shafunka culture, they found that the population had diseases that's only reflected in so-called Black Americans today. So that's how I was able to determine that there was Black Indians or Black so-called Blacks that built those
mounds
in New Orleans East, because they had syphilis and another infection called the tryphosinoma. I can't remember because there's so many different things I'm researching, but it was syphilis and another disease that's only, it was called the yaws, YAWS.
The yaws.
The yaws and the syphilis, and only so-called Black Americans
was the ones that contract that.
Right. And equatorial populations contract those diseases. And along with the fact that, you know, they was on a Lake Pontchartrain area where Safanka Nation exists today, and Chief Warhorse has a plaque that certifies herself as the descendants from the Department of Interior, as the descendants of the Safanka culture that built all of those mounds on North Shore and South Shore Lake Pontchartrain. So that mound building culture is or I should say, the Indian villages across New Orleans East and downtown and Gentilly uptown is a continuation of the Safanka mound building culture that existed, you know what I mean, historically and in pre-colonial times. So they existed where they already at, where they already at today.
They still there, right, today, right.
Right. So they didn't come from Georgia, Alabama, South Carolina, or Florida.
They right where they
at. Exactly. They existed where they already at today. So somebody that's tracing their genealogy who lives in New Orleans today, you know, you can't usurp somebody else's genealogy who would trace back to the New Orleans area, because you feel like, you know, I mean, Muskogee, there was Muskogee, and Muskogee existing in Georgia where I trace myself to, so I could just select the New Orleans Indian tribe too, because I was born on the street or I'm practicing the masculine culture today. You know what I mean? You have to actually reflect, your tribal identity has to reflect where your genealogy traced back to.
Right.
So yeah, the people came from Lake Pontchartrain area. They didn't come from nowhere else, you know, in the Southeast. They originated exactly where they was already at.
That's tough. But I believe that it's still towns like that all over, where people are still there and been there from day one.
Exactly.
Folks just didn't go and leave. Now, folks might have left and moved, but somebody stayed.
Right. So yeah, like our population in New Orleans today is like a melting pot of different Indian populations along with the Caribbean. So
somebody said syphilis predates the Europeans.
Yep. Evidently, in that mound building culture study, they found that disease existing during that time period, 2000 to 3000 BC, of the Safanka culture. So it was already existing back then. So that was like a marker showing that the descent was us.
Showing who was already over here. Yeah, that's tough.
Or something similar to, I should say.
Yeah, it wasn't more muted to what it is today, but it was a strain of it back in them days, basically what you're saying.
Right.
I got you.
So they got it. The Europeans today got it from somewhere, you know, in order for them to put that, you know, in their labs and produce it like they did.
Okay, all right. So what else we got? What else we running? Tracing New Orleans Indian Genealogy. Let me see. Okay, so you got surnames, masking, Indians are not real. Okay, we just went through that example of how to trace back New Orleans Indian surnames. So you got some surnames of people from
one of the excuse me. One of the examples that, you know, people who have pre-colonial New Orleans Indian ancestors, you could trace your people back through the Indian slavery, New Orleans Indian slavery database. You know, the different records.
New Orleans slavery database.
Right.
I got you. I'm over here taking notes. Go ahead. My bad.
No, you good. I was just scrolling down a note myself. But yeah, you could use that you use that resource to trace back. If your people actually do trace back to New Orleans, you're going back 300 plus years, 250 to 300 plus years.
Right.
You
So
use
what?
a slavery database because Indians were like heavily enslaved in the New Orleans area. You know what I mean? That's documented inside of the slavery database. I shouldn't say New Orleans. I'm calling it the New Orleans Indian Slavery Database, but it really would be the Louisiana Indian slavery database. But you also have the New Orleans birth register, the New Orleans colonial birth register, where you could find Indians' baptismal records, marital records, bill of sales, wills, transfers, all that. But yeah, one of the examples, you have plenty of different surnames. Like in this book called "The Entwined Threads of Red and Black: The Hidden History of Indigenous Enslavement in Louisiana, 1699 to 1824" by Layla K. Blackbird of UNO. So this was like an online book dissertation from a UNO professor, I believe. And on page 41, she shows the examples of, some Indian slaves, some Indian names of enslaved Indians in New Orleans by the name of John Guillory and Bontemps. Because a lot of times names like individual names became surnames on its own. So that, jump-started the family lineage or the family surname when you just have a name like Bontemps, because I've seen a couple Bontemps around the city inside of New Orleans. So on this page, she has, she basically reads John Guillory was just 15 years of age and listed as property of a slave owner named Trudeau, a settler with cattle farm along the banks of the Mississippi River, and goes on to say Sheriff DeGarry caught Guillory along with an 18-year-old friend Bontemps. So this was a part of a runaway slave. They actually had runaway slave suits where they were suing, petitioning for their freedom, to stay free.
Right.
So Bontemps, or AKA Good Times, which was the French translation of that, or English translation of the French name, as he was aptly called, had taken a small amount of silver from Pellerin, the keeper of the main warehouse of the Company of the Indies. Together, the two boys bought some brandy and set off to enjoy the day. For this, Francois Fleurier condemned them to death. First, they was, to be appraised of their value, then flogged, strangled, and hung. So Indian slaves was being lynched back then. So we could trace the origin of lynching, going back to the days that Indians was being enslaved or, messed with by the colonizers in the 1700s. So that's not something that they just started in Jim Crow. They could date that back to Indian slaves being hung in pre-colonial times. So that's one of the sources that you could find that came out of this book of some Indian names. Another one is the much larger database, like we were saying, the Louisiana Slave Database from ibiblio.org. And you click on that link, indianblibio.org.
Talking about the Afro-Louisiana History and Genealogy.
Right. And then when you get to that link, you check off, what you want to find, which will be under gender, female, male. Check off all of those, female, male, identified. And you could also check off the racial designation, which will be Indian. Now for this particular search, we just gonna check out Indian so we could just directly see, the specific Indian names. But you could also check off Metis and Griff too, because that's also Indian people who presume to have mixture in them as black or white. So that would come up with a lot of different results, showing a lot more Indian names that, just the Indian selection would have by itself. So right now we would check off the gender, all three of the genders, and just the Indian racial designation. And it also gives you the option to check off the plantation or the origin, but we'll leave that blank just so we can have some general results showing like everybody that was enslaved total, as Indians. And then we just hit the search. So you just have all of the genders checked off and the Indian racial designation. And then when that comes up, you start seeing about 280 Indian names. And a lot of these names still exist today in New Orleans. Like you'll see Suleiman, Adig, a whole list of different names. Antoine, which is one of the surnames of my family tree. Baptiste. And then we see that name Bontemps that was discussed in that book going back to 1728.
I'm still in the A's.
So yeah, this is a pretty deep loaded database of a lot of Indian names that became surnames, because some of them have full names and then some of them have the individual names that we could tell is surname names that became surnames later on, because that's what's in use today, like Baptiste. And when you go to the next page, you start seeing Divine, Felicane, Francisco, Francois, Gaskin. This is on page 2. Like these are all different names that became surnames in New Orleans today. So this would be, a resource for people to trace. One of the resources people could trace New Orleans Indian genealogy back to, using the names of the Indian slaves in New Orleans from this Indian slavery database. So then on page 3, you start seeing 2 names, basically names with full names, like Jean Baptiste, Jean Guillery.
First and last name.
Right. Jean Louis. Joseph Dick Chikachi.
Here we go. Abraham. They got all these. Okay.
And you see Louis.
John Baptiste.
Right. And so on these documents or these logs, they give the full information about that particular enslaved Indian, like the estate, the buyer's name, seller's name, the year that the document was created, the origin, gender, and plantation and racial designation. So they give you
a lot of Arabic owners. That's what somebody was saying.
Yeah.
A lot of Arabic Muslims names for owners. There was a whole bunch. You can hit what was the French? You can tell when it's the French. You can just look at the name and tell.
Yeah, a lot of these, and that's another thing too. A lot of them was enslaved by Louisiana Creoles and Moors. So when you see these Muslim names, that could actually be
a Moor
slave owners, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we also had Louisiana Creole slave owners. So we know that Louisiana Creole is basically, so-called black people of mixed, European, some of them Indian, and a lot of times mainly primarily Caribbean. Caribbean mixed with European, they call those Louisiana Creole. Caribbean black, Caribbean Negro mixed with European. And a lot of parishes had Louisiana Creole slave owners. St. Martin Parish, St. Mary Parish, Orleans Parish, St. Landry. Up until the time slavery, ended. We had black slave owners in Louisiana heavily.
I see. And that's a tough list. It tell you who the slave owner was. So would it be just the owner of the company, basically, and you went to work for them? Because most of them did most of them stayed there where they worked?
Right. So we see that, like that plantation, for some of them have Orleans Chapatoulas plantation. So Orleans Chapatoulas plantation was built on or nearby the Chapatoulas Indian village. So there was a lot of people on those plantations was Chapatoulas Indians.
Got you.
Full blood Chapatoulas and mixed Chapatoulas. So that would be a way to trace, your genealogy back to that particular tribe known as the Chapatoulas.
How did Do you know how did they take when they started calling them Negroes? How did that fly?
Well, they basically reclassified them to keep them enslaved because you also had Indian freedom suits in order for them to petition out of slavery based on being Indian descent.
Did they have a chance to go to Oklahoma during the Remove Act?
Yeah, they did. They did have Louisiana Indians sent to Oklahoma, the Choctaws, the Caddo, I believe. So yeah, you had some Indians in Louisiana, like Chief Warhorse people. They had to actually travel to Oklahoma to be documented. That's what she said herself.
Right.
They had to travel to Oklahoma to be documented as, on a Dawes Road, as Choctaw Indians.
Mm-hmm. They want to see, and then they were saying that they don't even really. Well, that's what they were saying. They just want to see that your name was on that list back in UN.
Right.
All right. Well, man, that was a good build on New Orleans Indian genealogy. I know I picked up and learned a few things just then. I hope everybody was paying attention. I see a lot of stuff going on in the chat. But yeah, that was a good one. I just learned a lot.
So then you got, like, we forgot to cover just real quick, like some of the Mardi Gras Indian genealogies.
Oh yeah, let's go ahead.
Of some of the Mardi Gras Indians, like the example I was talking about earlier, where you have people that mask as Mardi Gras Indians, not necessarily being New Orleans Indian descent. So you got people like you got a renowned Mardi Gras big chief named Tootie Montana, who was born I think in 1922 and just died about 15 years ago. He's a renowned Mardi Gras Indian big chief, but he's not. His genealogy doesn't trace back to Louisiana at all. It comes from Maryland, Virginia, South Carolina, and he also had a Senegal ancestor too. And that's where the last name Montana came from, because he had a great grandfather by the name of Jean Montaigne. And then the paternal lineage was carried down until it became Montana. So
they just came down and joined you all, or they just started his own thing when he got there?
Right. So they have about two different origins of the Mardi Gras Indians. Some of them say they celebrated because you had runaways that was coming from the intrastates, the intrastate slave trade, like Virginia, Carolina, and Georgia. They was sent to Louisiana in the early 1800s, and then once they decided to run away, they joined the Indian tribes, for safety, and they ended up, joining people that looked just like them and couldn't be teleported.
So basically, you're saying, so they say that they was Africans, but basically they was just American Indians kidnapped right here on this land, got shipped down there, and got pushed in, and then they was able to go in somewhere else where the language might have been a little different, but they was able to adapt to where it was at real easy.
Exactly. So they would just enslave, indigenous people from other states in the Southeast, and they got sent to Louisiana. And then, that's why it was maybe easy for them to run away or just identify what an Indian village looked like and who, what the Indian culture is.
Well, it's almost like now, if I run and I come to New Orleans, I'm gonna go to the hood where everybody at, because I know I'm gonna blend in with everybody. I'm not gonna go get me a house in a white community and stick out like a sore thumb. I'm gonna go where everybody at, and that's basically all they did was find a big group of people that look like you and just go dress like them, talk like them, and just get in the mix of them. And that's basically all they did.
Yeah, it was real easy for them to blend in. So that's one of the origins. I mean, and that the thing about that origin circulating is, this is what they say, I guess, in order to perform, because they performers. The masking Indians are performers. They tell this narrative or this story about that origin, I guess, to perform in these big European venues across.
But are they saying they're Africans, or are they saying they're Indians that came down?
They saying that they runaways. Now, in the genealogy, it reflects that they came from out of town, like the interstates, and shipped to Louisiana. But they saying that they runaway Africans and ran away to the Indian villages.
So the propaganda then got into the story, basically.
Right, and you got a lot of masking Indians repeat that, which really just confuses everybody that looks at it, because when they perform it, they doing a lot of Indian chants.
Right. Well, they need to. They need their genealogy done
ASAP. You know, and that's why I started researching some of the Mardi Gras Indians, you know, to confirm, like, is that really what it was? African slaves running away, you know what I mean? Or was they full blood New Orleans Indians, or was they other Indians from out of town, you know, and just ran away with the tribe?
I got one for you. Why they said that when the Africans came and the ones that did make it, I'm talking about after they got off the boat and still survived. They said they didn't mess with the niggas. The niggas used to rob them and mess with them and give them hell and stuff like that. So I was trying to figure, like, if I thought about then, if they do it now, like they mess with folks now, then, well, you know, you really didn't, you know, you might get an African man get a baby by a sister nowadays, but it's not like an everyday thing. And then probably back then, it's probably was one got him a lady, you know what I'm saying? But it wasn't just like everybody came and just got all women right then. I don't think it was like that.
Nah, because I think they had their own plantations that they was on, that the Africans was on, because the plantation was already filled up with Indian slaves. So the only Africans that would have came through would have been African men.
Well, if they would have had some children, and then them children had kids with Indians, and they had kids with Indians that had kids with Indians, you just an Indian at the end of the day.
Right, that African don't last that long in the lineage. By the time, you know, 5 generations later.
Just like that white ancestor. After about 5, 6 of us, it's over with.
Right, they wipe out quick.
Right. So real quick.
Then there's another origin of the Mardi Gras Indians being the fact that, like, Monk Boudreaux, I forgot to include this on the sheet. Monk Boudreaux is a big chief, still alive today, who traces back to Choctaw Indians and Cherokee Indians. Okay. And he says that they practice, well, him in particular, he's practicing because he descends from pre-colonial New Orleans Black Indians. So he understands that the story that's been taught about Africans running away is not true, because he actually said himself that he did research on his family. He found that, you know, that they're Indians and they trace back to him.
That's the propaganda, man. That's the propaganda. You know, somebody paying some money for folks to push that.
Yeah, they paying them big. That's why they perform it, you know, and you know,
every year we go to Juneteenth, right? Every year we go to Juneteenth. It's always at a small little park in the middle of the community. It don't mean that people come out, but, you know, it's just the same place every year. Well, this last year, it was at the Mercedes Dome, Atlanta Falcons Dome, and they laid out the red carpet. And then they got this big stage, and they out there singing "We African this" and "We African that." And I was like, somebody paid for this shit. You kind of get what I'm saying?
Yeah, they force feeding that heavy. Yeah, it's like every year it get heavier and heavier that they trying to, like, engrave that in people's head that, you know, they African slaves.
But they bring the Africans here to sell all the merchandise and stuff, and how you walking around there acting like them your people, and them folks don't care nothing about you. I mean, I'm just saying, they got their own
just to get the dollar. That's the only reason they saw. That's the only time you see them.
They got their own issues. We got our own issues, and we need to tend to ours right now. I got you. I totally got you.
Yeah, and so then it's a couple of New Orleans genealogies I trace. Like I put on that sheet, Leah Chase. I don't know if you're familiar with Leah Chase. That's Dookie Chase. Wife Dookie Chase had like a historical so-called black restaurant in New Orleans.
You kind of get muffled.
I was saying I traced Leah Chase genealogy, and she's the wife of Dookie Chase, the renowned New Orleans, historical New Orleans black restaurant, so-called black restaurant in New Orleans with local, you know, New Orleans-based food. I traced her genealogy, and her lineage goes back to before New Orleans existed. Free people of color born in the New Orleans area from the Montreals. It's spelled her lineage. The last name of these people that she traced back to was Montreuil. I'm gonna send it to you after the live. I should have sent it to you before we started. But there was some of the first Treme property owners, the Montreals. Her name is Francois Montreal, and I just gave the spelling Motreuil.
Sound French a little bit, don't it?
Yeah, that's during the time French had, because she married someone named Montreal. Her parents was named Juan Baptista Saison, and her mother was Susanna.
Mm.
So this around the time that French and Spanish was controlling New Orleans, or back and forth between French and Spanish. Originally the French, and then Spanish got control around in the 1760s. So the names changed. Obviously, the daughter married a Frenchman, but their names reflect, you know, who was controlling the territory
at the time.
So yeah, Leah Chase, she was born in 1923. She just died last year. She got a line, a obviously pre-colonial, pre-U.S. New Orleans line that goes back to 1705. Free people of color in New Orleans. And then I also trace the Young Money president, Mac Main. He descends from a enslaved Louisiana Creole from the Orleans Chapatoulas plantation, which
so
was where the Chapatoulas.
Well, you down there putting that work in. You just hooking. You doing everybody's work, ain't you?
Yeah. So I'm doing this particular research because that was a part of the the direct genealogy evidence that we descend from Louisiana Indians, because it's reflected in our genealogy. So it's not because we got just the cemetery or the burials or the mounds. It's still continued existing, reflected in the genealogy. So I did that research. It's a lot of people I did too.
So is it safe to say that
I also did Young Money rapper?
Is it safe to say all the history is under all the major cities that we already at?
Facts. It's sitting on, the cities are sitting on top of our Indian history in our cities.
I know St. Louis got a whole bunch of them. I know they built St. Louis on top of what we had going on over there. So now you're hearing it right here in New Orleans. They did the exact same thing. They just built the city.
If you research, they say New Orleans was built on top of the Indian village of Chachahoma. When they founded New Orleans,
right?
The original New Orleans government was built on top of an Indian village, and we know that the French Quarter, like we discussed earlier, it was built on top of all of them Black Indian burials. So I was in New Orleans. It's still here today. It never went nowhere. We got all these burials, all these villages. It never went nowhere.
We got a rich folk subdivision right now, and they're saying that and people don't even know about what we're talking about. When you say Indians, they're gonna think Hollywood, and they're gonna think natives. But right over here they have not native, but Indian not slave, but Indian cemeteries. They just found out they built all these houses on top of them, and it's around the time my people was here. So it's something worth looking into as well. But you're gonna find that everywhere.
That's right.
No matter where you go. I'm just scared to see what they're gonna find in Chicago.
That's close to the Cahokia.
Yeah. Well, that's down in that's St. Louis, ain't it? No, that's Middle Illinois. Yeah, that's Middle Illinois. Cahokia is Middle Illinois. Right there by Springfield. And then I know the Underground Railroad right there downtown St. Louis. One of the brothers had went through the train station and ended up in some shit. I was like, whoa, that's a lot. He said Atlanta too. Well, that's why they gentrifying the communities as well, because I know right there in Peoplestown in Atlanta, Dr. I forgot his name. He had took me around. He was showing me how it was all the freedmen's around there and how they took the land from them. Well, how they taking it now, and they was working to try to stop it. But right now, everything's getting gentrified all at the same time. It's not like they just targeting one area. They targeting it all.
Yeah, they tried it with Katrina. They tried. It didn't work. That's why they was trying to flush us out, blow up the levees. But it didn't work. Because, it brought in some gentrification over the, they call it the Bywater neighborhood that was in the lower Ninth Ward. Because now the lower Ninth Ward, which was all Black, and it was real, thugged out. But now, the white people took it over. But that's like the only area that they, gentrified though.
That might have been the part that they just wanted. They'd be scheming now.
They'll flood the whole city just to get that one part that they want.
Because they know if they had to do it again or whatever else they'll do, that they don't care. They'll do what they got to do to get their way. Yeah, buddy. By the water, gentrification in Batty, big bankers. Yeah, they haven't stopped yet. Gentrifying in my city, Washington, D.C. Much love to the chat. We got a lot of people on right now. Shout out to everyone. I know Phoenix has a lot, and then I didn't even stop her page. She had a lot of people on it. Then we have the No Grandma Killers page. Let me see. I ain't even been over there. It's been so busy. Here we go. Now everybody's on Phoenix page right now, so that's good. That's good.
I'm gonna look at the chat right quick on my other phone.
All right, we got Carrie Bay was good. He's down in New Orleans. I know he's
Carrie.
Yeah, his name Carrie. I know he's down there. What's up, Tasha? Knowledge Seeker.
What's up, Carrie? Yeah, his name Carrie. Turn the volume down. Other phone.
Yeah. Okay. Jean Baptiste, my great girl from my tribe, hid out in plain sight and natural juice to keep from
naturalist. I know that's a tough word, naturalist.
Yeah, I just tried to blow it by. I tried to act like I knew it out. You know what I'm saying? I just blew by it. Yeah, Mark Tracy's lineage back too. They trying it in my hood. 8th Ward. He says he's in 8th Ward. He said they coming. He see it.
Yeah, Gentilly. That's the 8th Ward. They coming for Gentilly heavy.
Yeah, that's what he said. He said he see it too. That's Carrie. I didn't know Carrie for a minute. Let me see. We got
because all of these are historical free people of color neighborhoods like Bywater, Treme, Gentilly. That's where they had Indian villages at, and then it transferred into free people of color neighborhoods. Like I was saying with Treme, Leah Chase people, who was the first owners, and they free people of color, the first owners, first property owners in Treme, New Orleans. And they trying to gentrify Treme. That's in the 7th Ward. So they coming for all the historical Indian village land, historical free people of color land. You know what I mean? And it's just up to us to trace our genealogies and claim it back, claim our family heritage back.
That's what we all working on right now, boy. We working it hard. You just don't know. See, I'm in a non-Indian friendly state right now. Georgia, they not Indian friendly around this motherfucker.
I see that. I be peeping that.
Folks here, hell, boy. Well, they ain't gonna make nobody bow down. Let me see what we got going on. Y'all just switching from chat to chat. I just left them both up because Phoenix has a lot of people in her chat right now. But yeah, I was trying to see before we go, do anyone have any questions real quick? You got a few minutes for any questions, big homie?
Yeah, I got some.
All right, let's see. All right, y'all. There you got it. Go ahead and shoot. What's your question? Come on in. Y'all know I know it's a delay, so I'll let y'all go ahead. I'll give you a few minutes to go ahead and get your question.
I'm gonna answer this one I see from Kiawa Yesa
Okay.
From 8:45. I know that probably a little minute ago. About 15 minutes ago. She said, who's the man named Louis Congo who got pulled up on by the runaway Indians? That was the city's executioner hired by the colonists, Louis Congo. He was the city's first executioner. They say he's an African, but I think he was just named Congo because the first Negro slave imports into Louisiana was from the Caribbean, imported by Bienville and Iberville, but they named him Louis Congo, obviously because he's a Negro. But he was the city's first executioner. In order for him to get his freedom, he became the executioner. He ended up imprisoning and killing, people that look like him.
Whoa.
In order for him to, stay free and justify him being the executioner, he had to do a whole bunch of different stuff,
like
executing people
that
look
Congo?
Like Louis Congo, yeah.
Okay, because they kind of sound like you heard of Cujo.
No, that's the famous, that's the popular African name they always be circulating.
Yo, hold on.
Cujo.
I can't hear you. All right. No, I'm saying you heard of Cujo though, right?
Yeah, the guy in Alabama they say was the last African.
No. Cujo, 1738, down in the islands. Captain Cujo was a Jamaican or Arawak, I believe.
Oh yeah, I heard him. Yeah.
Yeah, and he had to turn on his own people, and they gave him all this power and stuff to basically enslave his own people. and they sent them here to the Americas and sent a lot of Americans down there to him, to the islands.
Mm.
He said he glad they ran up on him. They should have killed him.
So they were trying. I think what happened was he got the help of the colonists to keep the Indians off of him. Because they broke into his house. The Indians had broken into his house trying to kill him.
Yeah, he probably killed the wrong person. They was on him. They was on him.
Yeah, they put out a hit for him.
Man, they said the sign's still there though. That's what's up. They said, are you familiar with Pascagoula Indians?
Yeah, the Pascagoula Indians was in southern Mississippi, and then they also came to Lake Pontchartrain in New Orleans area after the colonists, got to Mississippi. After Iberville and them got to Mississippi, they had to move over to New Orleans. I think they had a village set up about, they say 30 leagues from New Orleans. That's about maybe 35 miles, however that's converted. But they had a village. They ended up setting up a village like right outside the city of New Orleans in the 1800s. So yeah, they was in southern Mississippi, then they came over to the New Orleans area, Pascagoula.
Yeah.
Because they got a city named Pascagoula in Mississippi.
Yeah, Mississippi. Yeah, I know all about it.
That's around Gulfport and Pass Christian.
Gulfport and Gaucher and Moss Point and all that up over there. Yeah, I got bam. They jammed me up over there and all they did was took me to the city line and put me out the city. It was like, yo, you gotta get up out of here.
Trying to put you out.
Yeah, they did. They took me out. They put me out of Gaucher. They dropped me off, I think, at Moss Point somewhere. They was like, oh, we ain't gonna deal with you. We just gonna put you out of here. I was like, dang.
Just send you on your way.
That's what they did. But yeah, man, I don't see any more questions, man. I'm happy I'm thankful you came through.
I appreciate you reaching out to me to do this.
Man, no problem. We're gonna see you on April 4th.
Yeah, I'm gonna be there. I'm gonna be at the No Grandma Killers tour, the event in Atlanta.
That's gonna be big love right there. Big love. I'll make sure to show love when you get here, big homie.
Definitely appreciate it. I'm gonna be there selling my books too. I'm gonna have the books ready. The Black Americans and Aboriginal Americans paperback. I'm gonna have that printed out ready for that.
Well, y'all here first. Y'all heard it here first. Y'all know where it's gonna be at. Make sure y'all there. Get your tickets, because once it sell out, I don't want to hear it. Don't call me talking about get you in. I don't want to hear it. All right, big homie. Well, you got anything you want to say to everybody before we get out of here?
Just much love to everybody. Thank y'all for tuning in, and definitely trace your family genealogy. Get with your people.
How can they reach you? You got a YouTube page, a Facebook page, Instagram?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Johnnie Aborigine. You can reach me on either one. At Johnnie Aborigine, Instagram and Facebook. All
right, y'all got it. Hit him up. Keep up with Johnnie. Y'all know Johnnie put in that work, man. Thanks a lot again for the information. I sure learned me something tonight. And I'll be in contact with you, big homie.
Appreciate it, brother. Y'all have a good night.
All right, you too.